Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news agenda. First of all, a very happy new year to you. This is our first Newspeak of 2024. Very pleased, as usual, to have Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, our senior fellow and of course historian and law commentator, and Amy Gallagher, from Stand Up to Woke, and actually something else possibly, yes, isn't that right? Do you want to tell us what it is?
Yeah, so potentially running for mayor for the SDP, depending on getting
in London,
yes,
of course,
yes.
Against Khan.
Yes,
Great.
yeah.
So you might well be standing for the SDP in London. Why?
Why? I think Sadiq Khan is just. I think people are absolutely sick of him. I know people have been moaning about Khan for a long time, but I think the ULEZ and the LTNs, and he's just ramped up the sort of wokery in the last year or so. I think there is a real need to push back against Khan more than ever, I think. And this year the mayoral election is first past the post, which has never been before.
Well, why have they changed it? Do you know?
No, I don't know actually. It's an interesting question.
It's first past the post just for the mayoralty?
Yes, yeah. So,
Right.
which does mean it might play a bit differently in terms of the vote might be split in a way that it wasn't before, in that other left-leaning candidates, people, if they vote for them, they can't vote for Khan and so on. So there's a few more kind of potentially interesting people running for it. I don't know if Jeremy Corbyn will run, but there's an idea that he might, and there's a few other names floating around. George Galloway, and then Lawrence Fox, obviously on the different end of the spectrum. But I think there's I think particularly with the by-election in Uxbridge, which most people thought what the Conservatives won, and most people thought the reason for that was because people were so furious at ULEZ.
Yeah.
It's become a very, very divisive issue, and it is really very much linked to Khan. I think people associate it with Khan. So I think there's that, and I think just generally there's just been a general sense. I think it's been around for a long time, but I think particularly in the last year with the riots, the protests, the Palestinian-Israel conflict and various other conflicts in the streets of London, that people just feel like London is a completely alien city. And not only is that not being acknowledged, but all the while they're being pushed, diversity is our strength all the time. And it's almost just maddening, actually. I hear so many people say, I don't want to be in London anymore. There's something about it now, it's changed in a way that, I just don't feel comfortable here.
But you're a Londoner,
Yes,
aren't you?
yeah.
Born and bred?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Because you're in Orpington, isn't that right?
Yeah,
now?
but I grew up in New Cross, South London area.
Did you grow up in New Cross?
Yeah,
really?
yeah. But now I live on the suburbs. But obviously the ULEZ was expanded into where I live, so I've seen that impact where I live. But I've always worked in London, so as a nurse I've always travelled into inner city London, and I've worked in hospitals all around London as well. So I've seen how it's changed, and even I don't like working in London anymore too much.
You're a Londoner, aren't you?
West London, born and bred.
Born and bred. Do you think that Khan is just simply a shoe-in? No disrespect to you.
Well, so the last polling we saw on this a few months ago had Khan at a 25-point lead on everyone else, which is a remarkable thing. And of course, our viewers at home will be thinking, how on earth is it possible that this man has such a lead when you look at knife crime, when you look at ULEZ, when you look at all of these different guides, and when you saw that ridiculous fireworks show we had for New Year's Eve, when every single diversity box was ticked in this very impressive looking display. I saw it without the order. I saw it from a rooftop. It looked great. Then I watched it on television, and my gosh, my heart sank when I saw the messaging behind it. But of course, the reality is that the people that Amy is talking about, the people that are watching, are very different from the majority of Londoners today. And of course, as I've said many times on this channel and elsewhere, one of the reasons for the Labour Party wanting to have mass immigration was to bring in a demographic who tend to vote Labour. Ethnic minorities vote 80% Labour. London is now primarily a city where white British are only 37% of the population. And those people who are white British, many of them are young professionals who also tend to vote Labour. So in terms of its demographics, London is overwhelmingly a Labour city-state. That being said, at the last election, Sean Bailey, who was the Conservative candidate, came within a gnat's whisker of winning that election. And I rather lament the fact that he's not running this time, because I think if you add together all of the things that we've seen in the last year or the last 4 years, Khan's hold on power is a lot weaker than it was. And my fear is that he doesn't have a sufficiently strong candidate running against him. Susan Hall, who's a very charming, lovely lady, is a Tory, isn't necessarily the heavyweight that you need to bring him down. I'm very curious, Amy, whether you think that this new first past the post scheme is gerrymandering by the mayor's office. Is this going to give him an unfair advantage, or will this weaken him?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. It's difficult to say, really. It's difficult to say how many people will move from Khan to the other left. It depends if Jeremy Corbyn runs. It sounds like George Galloway's going to run. They're both very pro-Palestine. They're both very to the left. It depends how much support they've got, if people would go with them over Khan. It depends. Some people on the left don't like ULEZ, don't like kind of thing, surveillance state, that kind of thing. But I don't, it's difficult to know. I think it can go either way. It's again with Susan Hall, it might be. I mean, it looks like Lawrence Fox might be running as well. So it could go against her as well. Because
we saw the damage done to Labour in the by-election regarding ULEZ, didn't we? And if anything is going to topple Khan, it will be ULEZ. And that was insult was added to injury just this week when we saw that the last minute there was the RMT strike for the tube trains was halted at the last minute by Khan magically finding money behind the back of the sofa. Yeah. Of course, we know this was money from ULEZ. So the poorest in society are paying for well-paid train drivers to get even more money and go on another holiday. And I think when you realise this is the future of Khan now kowtowing to the youth, because ASLEF now wants a 12% pay rise, having seen what they've given to the RMT, I think this is the time for Khan to actually take a tumble if he's ever going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, magically found 60 million. This is the level of money we're talking about here. And it's affecting everyone, these train spikes. Everybody's just feeling a sense that things don't work, things don't run on time. You know, it's really difficult being in London. If it's not a protest, it's a train strike. It's very unusual that everything's just smooth and you can just live your life in a ordinary way.
But the thing is that despite this, I mean, as you've said, I was in a taxi the other day, and you tend to think that black cab drivers are going to kind of be pretty much on our side generally. But there was one, and he was sort of flummoxed when I said that I thought the Khan would win. He said, "You've got to be joking. After all this, it's as though people don't quite still know the extent of changes in London, that people vote culturally, that, and as you mentioned, the white young professionals, they're woke. They would vote on a point of principle because of who Khan is more than anything he's done. I mean, for example, he's had this, recently, this situation with the Ukraine, and basically, not giving Ukraine these, non-compliant vehicles. Did you hear about this?
No.
Yes, exactly. He said, we can't, they're not non-compliant. It's extraordinary, really. But when you look at the demonstrations we've had over the past 2 months in London and continuing, you can absolutely see why Khan might be, And I mean, he managed to float over that whole protest period, didn't he? He didn't say anything particularly.
No, he did. He came down on kind of. He said something about there should be no hate speech or no Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. Made a point of noting both, where it was of course primarily anti-Semitism that was the issue, as opposed to there wasn't really much Islamophobia, as I know, or anything expressed. But he's just. I just think there's an issue with him being just more and more. He keeps seems to doubling down on the message, and more knife crime goes up, and more people are dissatisfied. But he knows he can get away with it because with any of the other candidates that are opposing him, if they speak to any of these issues like immigration or anti-Semitism, it will alienate a lot of the vote in London, as you say. So it's very difficult to oppose him when you know that he's got the majority of the people behind him.
This is the problem, surely, for Susan Hall.
Yes, because she had to be very careful, I think, with the Palestinian protests.
Well, she didn't say anything, Susan, did she? She just sort of said, "Oh, I think obviously hate speech is terrible in all contexts," or something. I'm not quite sure, but whatever it was, it wasn't a stand, but how can she if she even wants to get some votes?
Yeah, I mean, the sad reality is, I even sort of rather, I don't even like saying it, but you may have to actually have an ethnic minority candidate as the only likely person who can bring down a Labour mayor, because of the fact that people do vote based on ethnic and cultural grounds. So if you want to have a switch away from Khan, you may need to have somebody who is from another ethnic minority background. Because certainly I know that, Indians, for example, are more likely to vote Conservative. Certain elements of the black community are more likely to vote Conservative compared to Muslims and so forth. So there are lots of dynamics there. Certainly within the first 2 generations, people tend to vote on cultural levels. After that, you do tend to see more diversity of opinion.
It's the interesting thing, actually, though, with that is that even people that you would think, you mentioned Indians are natural conservatives. I remember David Cameron saying that or something, but it doesn't translate into voting for the Conservatives. It's almost like the Conservatives are still tarred with this brush of Enoch Powell and, in their view, and therefore anti-immigrant or whatever. But I think, as SDP candidates, or indeed any other smaller party candidate, Reform, I think, are standing Howard Cox.
Yes, that's right.
Got your work cut out, haven't you?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think you're right. I mean, obviously Khan is a Muslim, and obviously Labour, he's left-leaning, but because he's a Muslim, he can sort of, appear slightly conservative, and he's religious, so he can kind of sit on both sides, and I think he can appeal to quite a lot of people that way. But it is very difficult to oppose him, and like you said, the mayoral race, it's very much about personality. It's very much about the individual in the way that, obviously all politics is like that, but particularly the mayor, it's being a sort of figurehead, and it is very much about, as you say, race and culture and personality, much more than it is about policies. Actually, people vote in very tribally, more so, I think, in London.
I'm curious to see what happens if Jeremy Corbyn does run, because there's also talk of him forming his own political party to run in the general election, along with Piddock, the old Labour MP, this lady who's joining forces also from the radical left wing of the Labour Party. And so if they do set up this new party to run at the election, I'm curious as to whether actually that will prove much of a challenge to the Labour Party.
Do you think we should still have a mayor in London?
I think
worth it?
I think that there's value to having a mayor because, of course, you're able to actually unite, have somebody overseeing, and there's an integrated strategies that can be brought into effect. But I don't think that I've seen much impressive work, not only from this mayor, but from actually, I think Ken Livingstone was the most effective mayor we had, even though I disagree with him fundamentally on many political things. But in terms of the infrastructure of London and so forth, I think there was a benefit to it. Some were under Boris Johnson, or not as much, but definitely not under Khan. I mean, just to say, London is now announced this week as the slowest city in the world, with this 20-mile-per-hour traffic routine. In every way, he's made lives harder for the average Londoner.
It seems to be going, that seems to be intensifying. It almost seems deliberate, actually. I mean, the war on the car.
Oh, yeah.
And ask any cabbie, I mean, I moved, London born and bred, I moved out, made a programme for the channel about it. And the fact is now it seems that it's a very, very tough place to be. It's a very tough place to live and exist.
Yeah, and to travel, as you say, as this war on cars is ramping up with LTNs and with ULEZ, at the same time, public transport there's loads of issues with the strikes and infrastructure breaking down. So you really have to, before you travel into London, you really have to think about your journey, whether it's possible. I don't drive, but I've been thinking about learning to drive. And then I think, actually, what's the point? Because I'm not going to be able to drive much around London anyway. But then there's transport doesn't, it's very often cancelled or working or delayed. So it's really hard work being in London. You have to really put a lot of thought into to just getting about.
Yes. When you, I mean, this is coming up in May, isn't it? May. When you look at the general, here we are in January the weekend of the 15th? Nearly. I mean, what's the lookout? Does your heart sink politically when you look at this sort of lookout for this year? Or a lot of people in politics are sort of saying this is going to be a dynamic year, right? This is going to be a really interesting year.
Dynamic for all the wrong reasons,
Well,
I
yes,
suspect.
but I mean, do you sort of look and think, I cannot see any way in which the situation is going to get better?
Well, it's interesting because Aris Russinos, who's a very good writer, and a few others were saying that at the New Year mark, that 2023 will be the calm before the storm. So if you thought things were bad in 2023, wait to 2024 on all levels, in Ukraine, with Taiwan and China, with Israel and Palestine, with the Trump election and so forth. On every level, geopolitically at least, the world's going to be even more unstable than it is currently, as America's hegemony and the American empire shrinks and it becomes more isolationist. And in this country, I don't know, I think it's certain that we're going to have a loss for the Tory party, which means we're going to have the election of a Labour Party, I think almost inevitably with a majority. We'll see about that. But that means that we're in for, 4 or 5 years of extreme radical politics. I think, the Keir Starmer's doing a very good job at hiding all of this from the public. So we're seeing a very middle of the road, very palatable Keir Starmer. But we know, for example, he's had private discussions with the Greeks about returning the Elgin marbles, and he wanted them not to make any of this public until after he was elected. So you just have to wonder what other things has he been, just as we had with Joe Biden, having to appeal to AOC and the left-wing thing there. We've seen what's happened in America, and I think that's a foretelling of things to come here.
Because this is it not, this is the first election coming up since, COVID, and indeed the BLM thing and the whole cultural assault, isn't it?
Yeah, lots changed.
I mean, I don't quite know how that will have changed in some ways the result in the long term. But I mean, when we look at the small parties that we all know very well, do you really think, I mean, I'm sorry, of course you do, otherwise you wouldn't be standing. But I mean, well, no, because people actually do stand for other reasons too. But I mean, what kind of impact do you see them having?
I don't think this year they'll have all that much impact, but I think what's going to happen this year is I think it's going to be a pretty dire year for politics for people who think as we do this year. I think Labour will get in. I think Khan will probably remain mayor.
I think it's almost certain.
Almost certain.
Yeah.
But I think maybe what will happen is we'll have a Labour government, and then maybe by the next election, people will be experiencing the consequences of that, and then there might be an opportunity for the small parties to gain more traction and more. So it might be not this election, but the next election. This might be the one where it's the final straw.
Yes.
I mean, if you remember, the last election, the smaller parties had more power because you had the Brexit party. They're not the Reform Party, and the Tories had to compromise and adopt Brexit party manifesto platforms in order to secure the election. The only way to eliminate the Brexit party as a threat was to park their tanks on the Brexit party's ground. They broke all those pledges as soon as they got into power, but at least there was an effort to actually become more right-wing in order to deal with the Brexit threat. The Tories now, of course, aren't going to become the next party, so the Reform Party's ability to in any way influence the next government isn't really there.
Well, the Reform Party was, it's just gone into third place in a couple of polls. What do you make of it? I mean, obviously, you've tied your colours to the mast, the SDP. What do you think of it? Do you think that they are, because they're sort of, it seems to me, Rafe, that with Reform, they're sort of going to be kind of portrayed as being this hard right party, when they're almost like, there's nothing of the sort hard right about them, really.
The Reform Party is not hard right. The thing is, we haven't had a properly right-wing government for so long, people have forgotten what one looks like. And this is actually more of a traditional 1980s conservative government. So, that's the Reform Party. It's giving the population what they want. We know that Tory MPs are to the left of not just Tory voters, but of the average voter on things like immigration and so forth. So we haven't really had a true conservative party. The Reform Party is much better at reflecting true conservative values. I have some disagreement economically with them. I think they're more of a neoliberal party than a old-fashioned high Tory party.
Yeah.
But it's always been a broad church on that level. The SDP, I think, actually is in many ways closer to the interests of the public And it's a great shame that it's not better known about, because the SDP is to the left on economics, like the population as a whole, and not as a whole, but the public lean to the left economically, and they lean to the right in terms of social issues, and they're more small c conservative when it comes to things like tradition, patriotism, defence, and so forth. And so I think both those parties are actually are the two bright spots in an otherwise bleak landscape.
Yes, with the SDP, of course, the SDP is I think got the best immigration policy at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to say,
which is like a complete moratorium, isn't it, for a while?
Yeah, complete pause on all immigration for at least 5 years. So it's, thinking of them in terms of left and right, it's not always helpful, because in some ways the SDP are quite hard line on issues like immigration, more so than reform. And they're very anti-woke and very culturally conservative. So they kind of, it's not so easy to think of them as just left and right. But there is a sort of image issue, I think, with both of them, but particularly with the SDP, because people just think they're sort of old lefties, or they don't really know much about them. But actually, there are a lot of aspects of them would be very appealing to people if they just understood. So it's more about publicity and people understanding, because I think it's, as Matt Goodwin points out, the combination that Rafe just described, sort of economically not too sort of not too kind of Thatcher right, but quite to centre right economically, but conservative in every other respect, is very appealing to a lot of people. But people just don't know the SDP; they just don't know about them.
Well, they don't. I mean, if you're under a certain age, that's the point. I mean, the SDP in the 1980s were really a thing. I mean, they became solid third party. Actually, it wasn't just all creeping up. They were the solid. People were worried about them. The Tories were worried about it because they took seats from either side.
Yeah.
And they actually did win by-elections or whatever. What's dominating at the moment is, I don't know whether you've taken much interest in it, but this situation with the sub-postmasters, right? And I mean, I want to ask a question, which I think Nigel has been asking. Do you think there should be a blanket pardon for all of these people that have gone through this terrible experience?
I do. Well, today, as we film this, the Prime Minister has announced that primary legislation will be enacted in order to actually ensure that we don't go through this individual process, and that there will be a blanket decision. That's courted some controversy, because some people are saying, well, yes, the problem is there are a few cases where people actually were genuinely guilty, and those people are going to also be caught up in this pardon. But I think, so what? The old principle of the legal system was better that 12 guilty men go free than that one guilty man is convicted unfairly. That's been a standard premise of British law, and I think in this case, when you're talking about, there were 980 people, I think it was, I think 700 of whom are still alive. I would much rather that they get the compensation that they're deserved, and that they get the exoneration and the proof, because they've had their lives destroyed over 20 years. But how awful and tragic is it, and outrageous, that once again we have a reactive government. They've had years to come to terms with this. There have been panorama documentaries on it. There have been statements in the House about this. But only when you have an ITV drama, years after the fact, does the government actually take action. And I think it's outrageous that they haven't apologised for the slowness with which they've dealt with this story.
Yes, it was. What do you think it's shown about Britain, actually? I mean, I've seen some columns really sort of saying this has really just shown, because many people are calling this the biggest miscarriage of justice in our judicial history. It shows just a complete sort of miasma of incompetence, doesn't it? And buck passing and, well, rottenness, really. Yeah,
I think so. Our society is obsessed with justice and injustice and virtue and all of these things. But I think this issue, it really sort of real genuine injustice, like a kind of injustice that really destroyed people's lives. It wasn't wrapped up with identity or kind of invented subjective grievance. I think that's why people have responded so strongly to it, because I think it was about the very, very powerful, wealthy people, oppressing the little people, and it was about power and wealth, and as you say, and I think that's where the real injustices in society are often. That's the real disparity, kind of people with money and power and how they do, as you say, pass the buck or don't, brush things under the carpet because they can, because they've got power. And I think people really have responded to that because it is a genuine, real injustice, which I think people see in small ways in their organisations and in the NHS and in various other places a lot of the time, that people with money and wealth get away with things, bankers, politicians, so on. And it's the little people that don't have a voice, particularly if they're white and they're middle class and,
Well, yes, but at the same time, the point can be made that at the same time as this is going on, we've got the Prince Andrew situation, which actually shows, actually shows that people don't actually, even the highest in the land, don't get away actually with things.
Maybe, but just before we get on to that, I just wanted to come back on this because I think this is an important point. But there's a broader lesson for the future, which is the degree to which people become deferential to technology, and they put their own common sense and their own instincts to the side, and they're willing to go with it, as Little Britain used to say, computer says no, right? And this ability to actually disconnect reality, because when you're talking about sub-postmasters, we're talking about the backbone of England. Post offices in local communities are the heart of that community, and the postmasters who run them are the most decent part of English stock. And to have the obvious common sense that hundreds of these people suddenly are going to become tea leaves is just absolutely, obviously not the case. And the fact that people were so willing to just disbelieve their own instincts, I think is very scary when you think about how technology is going to play an increasingly important role in our lives, particularly with AI. I mean, we may have many more of these sorts of situations coming around the corner, and it behooves all of us to be more alert to this. But yet, on the point of Prince Andrew, I mean, look, we have to say he is innocent until proven guilty. He's not been charged with anything. He's not been set before a court. But he's been found guilty in the court of public opinion with his ratings now at 8%. And I think certainly we are seeing that no one can escape in this era of post-Me Too and social media. Even the big titans can fall, at least in the public eye. I mean, we haven't seen anyone convicted after the 2008 financial crisis, for example. So, I mean...
Yes, good point, actually, yes. I mean, it just seems that people... I don't know whether this is the long-term result of a decline in educational standards, but people seem not to be able to make a judgment anymore, as you say, reliant on technology. This is a real problem, isn't it? I mean, it's a combination of stupidity and petty authority.
Yeah, it's not real leadership, is it? It's kind of a management class that are very bureaucratic and just delegate, and there's no real kind of genuine thinking going on. I mean, you see that across, I work in the NHS, you see it all the time, and they just defer to their anti-racist policy. They don't think about what it means, or they think you defer to anything. And there's, it's a class of people who get paid a very lot of money, usually to be just like that, to not think too much and to just go along with what, what they're told.
Yes.
And that's why they're able to stay in the position.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to be too Pollyanna-ish here, but it is the beginning of the year. Do you see, in any area that we might discuss, any green shoots of optimism? I mean, I am aware that sometimes, we sit here and we talk about things and it just seems, oh my goodness, slit my wrists and everything. Do you, what grounds for hope in the general situation? Economic? Foreign, cultural, whatever, do you see?
I don't see much on the economic grounds. I mean, look, Rishi Sunak did halve inflation. We have slow growth in the economy, but debt has risen last year compared to the year before that. So there's no reason to believe that's going to change. In terms of the cultural wars, there have been some bright spots in 2023, which we can look forward as being green shoots for the future. World Athletics and UK Athletics both banned trans athletes from participating in women's sports, which is a good thing to see. We also saw woke corporations like Bud Light and Disney getting hammered in their share prices as people basically said, go woke, go broke. So those are reasons for optimism. But on the broader picture, the broader spectrum, I can't say that 2024 offers much broad sunlit uplands compared to 2023.
What about you, Amy?
I think Elon Musk taking over Twitter has been very interesting in that pushback against certain ideas gains more momentum than it used to. I mean, what we're going to come on to talking about with Harvard was an example of that. So it's easier to kind of contest things and for people to gather around and to challenge things. I think Vivek Ramaswamy in America is quite. I don't agree with him on everything, but I think he's a very appealing politician, and there does seem to be particularly in America, more very intelligent people on the right that are appealing to people that they wouldn't normally have appealed to. Obviously, he's Indian and he's very bright, and he doesn't come across necessarily like a traditional Republican. So there is this the left and the right is sort of collapsing, I think, in terms of old stereotypes, and there's a kind of potentially a new kind of politician coming through a bit that can speak to something that's happening in a way that transcends the tribal elements a little bit.
Yes, they seem to be, I mean, basically the Republicans seem to have a fair amount of sort of talent or shall we say plausible people compared to the Democrats. I mean, when it comes, because this is going to be a big thing, isn't it? And we'll have to wait until almost a year, it's like November, for the election in America. Would you want Trump to win?
Well, I don't think there's any other option right now, because we know that the Republican Party is Trump's party. And I think the great shame is actually that DeSantis chose to run this time around, because all that's going to happen now is that he's going to lose a lot of potential voters for the next election, because Trump, of course, will turn hugely against DeSantis and will discredit him as much as he can, as he does for any competition, which means the next time we have an election, it's less likely that DeSantis will have a chance of running for the presidency successfully. I wish he'd held his horses and waited until 2028 or 29, whenever that will be. But in terms of hope for the future, actually, there's another North American country, Canada, that offers some hope. We all know Canada is the capital of woke, and the emperor of woke is Trudeau. But what we've seen there, even though they've got the most radically left-wing youth as well, even the youth now are turning against the left and are becoming, the poll ratings for the Conservatives among the youth there are surprisingly high now. And I think it's because they've seen the reality of years of left-wing government under Trudeau, and they see the damage that's been caused, and they're turning against him. And I think that should give us some hope here. We sort of worry about how long will we have the Labour government, given how woke our youth are. There's actually hope there for something in the future.
What's the name of the guy, the newish head of the Tory
Pierre
party?
Poilievre.
That's right, yes. Youngish guy, 30s. Would you welcome a Trump victory this year?
I'd prefer him to Biden. So yeah.
Do you think it is going to be Biden and Trump?
Yes, I think it will be. I prefer DeSantis or Vivek Ramaswamy, but I definitely prefer Trump to Biden, and I think it will be Trump, and I think he'll win. Yeah.
I mean, there are issues, of course, because he's been disqualified from running in some states. That has to go through the federal court, still to the Supreme Court, to see whether he'll be allowed to run in those states. We don't know whether he'll be doing his presidential debates from behind bars or not. So there are still some outstanding issues.
One thing that gave me hope, actually, you've actually alluded to it already, was seeing those three heads of Ivy League colleges in America. Basically, have all of them resigned now, or just two of them? But they were up against the congressional committee, and they basically could not say, could they, that it was against the rules of their universities to actually call for the obliteration of Israel or to be anti-Semitic. And this really shocked people, didn't it?
Even worse than that, it was specifically the genocide of Jews.
Yes.
Can you call for the genocide of Jews? Yes. And their response was to say it depends on the context.
Yes.
Which I guess those of us who are strongly in favour of free speech may say, well, there's some argument for that. But of course, we know from universities over the past 5 years that if you ask someone where they're from, that's a microaggression, and you've caused trauma, and you should be, cancelled, and so on. So people just thought, well, hang on, why have they suddenly come out in favour of free speech? And actually, I think, there was something about it being Jews that people felt was the issue, because if they had been asked, is it okay to call for the genocide of black people or any other group, I think most people would suspect they wouldn't respond like that, or they would certainly hesitate to respond like that. And actually the ease with which they responded, they didn't even look like it was the kind of anguish on their face. They actually looked like they were smiling. They didn't seem to care at all. And it was quite shocking to see. And we were seeing what's been hidden under the surface of these universities really just come right to the forefront. And it was quite shocking,
It was obviously now people are saying that because one of them, I think it's what is the name now? Gay.
Claudine Gay.
Claudine Gay. Basically, she's the victim of racism now. That was a matter of time before that happened. But I mean, to me, I was really pleased to see these people actually, facing the consequences of their positions.
But in a way, she didn't, and this is what is exasperating about all this. The reason she left office was because of plagiarism. It wasn't because of what she said there in that hearing, and it's almost as if that was actually just something to apologise for, not to resign over. And they have to find other reasons to get rid of a person. But it also goes to the bigger issue, of course, of fulfilling diversity quotas and hiring the wrong people for the wrong jobs. This was a woman who clearly, from her academic record, published, I think, 2 papers in her life or something like that. I mean, to be the president of Harvard University, probably this top academic job in the world, perhaps, on such a flimsy record, I think is unbelievable. Now the shortest span of any Harvard president, only 6 months in office. But we've seen it elsewhere in industry and corporations. Very quickly we find out that people put into these positions aren't up to the job and they leave before their term of office expires. And we've had several cases of this in 2023, and it just drags down society as a whole. I mean, Harvard is a classic case for this. Harvard was sued for racism by Asian Americans, by which we mean Oriental, Chinese and Japanese, because they were not getting positions at Harvard because Harvard was choosing to have African Americans instead, even though they had lower gradings. And of course, what happens as a result of that is you're turning away the brightest minds, future Nobel Prize winners, people who could actually become future donors to Harvard. And it's almost Harvard is deliberately harming itself in order to advance ideology.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, that in a way, you see, that's one of the reasons I think is good, is that, okay, it was on plagiarism, but either way, it's shown that it was a big diversity hire, doesn't it? That's what it shows. In fact, that this is it in practice, and you're seeing it with all lights blazing right out there in front.
And yet, even there, you see the BBC and others turn this is an attack on a black woman and so forth. It's appalling.
Yes,
and of all the articles that she did write, which weren't very many, they were all about race and gender.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's interesting that the plagiarism, because the plagiarism aspect, it goes hand in hand with woke, because the whole idea of DII is just repeating mantra, not having your own ideas. It is about copying. It's about saying, sticking to the party line. So from a woke perspective, actually, the more you say what you're supposed to say rather than coming up with anything original, the more you will rise to the top. Anybody that says anything different won't. But if you just copy what you're supposed to, so it's just revealing that academia is just completely empty now. It's
rotten.
Just,
Totally rotten.
Well, it shows how far you can get with the snake oil salesman routine, I wish I'd known this 20 years ago. I'd be Chancellor of Oxford University by now.
On that note, actually, if you have any, do let us know actually in the comments what you would like to see happen this year. Try and keep it clean and, decent. But what you would like to see in 2024. Things can only get better, to coin a phrase, I think. Thank you very, very much, Amy. Thank you, Rafe, for that. And we shall see you next time. Please don't forget, of course, in Brighton on January the 23rd. Take care, bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.